Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive.
Quite frankly, I get most of my news from you.
Joan Esposito.
Y'all ready for this?
On WCPT 820.
Hiya. How do you like the snow? I went out, left the car in the driveway last night, woke up to a car buried under a foot of snow. Oh, yeah. It was a little more than we were expecting. Those people who are close to downtown are not seeing as much as some of us who are near the lake in the Burbulas. But, you know, I thought this was supposed to be a very low snow winter. We shall see. Okay, before it gets too far away, I do have a correction. I am going to, as I promised you, I'm going to try to pay more attention to the AP News at the top of the hour and give you any extra information or corrections as need be. Matt Gaetz, as you have no doubt heard by now, has withdrawn his name from contention for the next Attorney General. Associated Press reports that Trump said, well, you know, he was doing well. And I was waiting for the other side of that story, but Associated Press didn't bring it to you. So allow me to do that now. He didn't have the votes in a Republican Senate that was going to insist on confirming him, even though Donald Trump really wanted them to just roll over and go home. He didn't have the votes. That had been conveyed repeatedly to the White House, and it didn't change. Matt Gaetz didn't have the votes. Matt Gaetz was not going to be confirmed. And the longer, I think that Matt thought that if he was, you know, he resigned his seat in Congress because, oh, I'm going to be Attorney General. Oh, by the way, that ethics report, don't release it now because I'm not a member of Congress, so the Congressional Ethics Committee got nothing to do with me. So it was like they had this brilliant plan. Gaetz, if he got confirmed, would do anything Trump wanted. And Gaetz would get this whole ethics report squashed once and for all. Win-win. But that wasn't how it turned out. That was not how it turned out. The Senate has not. They may later, you know, because Republicans can always disappoint. You got to count on that. They may at a later time decide to roll over with recess appointments, but as long as Matt Gaetz' name was out there, that didn't look like it was going to happen. No. So I think because there was still so much pressure to release the report, and come on, you know, the report is basically coming out in dribs and drabs. 2 women testified before the House Ethics Committee. Gaetz paid them for sex. That's prostitution, folks. And it is believed in the FBI investigation that the number of women Gaetz paid for sex is significantly larger than 2. Apparently, he likes the pros. And one of those women who admits she had sex with Gaetz at one of these druggy orgy parties in Florida, invitation only, don't you know, said she saw him have sex with a girlfriend of hers who was 17 years old up against a gaming table. Oh, well, that's romantic. So it wasn't going away. Our wonderful, wonderful Democratic congressman from Illinois, Sean Casten, decided to use a procedure to help bring this to light. What he did is something, he notified the chair of his intent to raise a question of the privileges of the House. What does that mean? That means that he will insist that the entire House vote on whether or not to release the report, which means everybody has to go on record. This can't be just swept up under the rug. Oh, we just don't think we're going to do it. No. The first thing, what Sean Casten did, the first thing that would be triggered would be the Republicans would try to table the motion. And if that failed and it came to a vote, the whole House would have to vote on whether or not to release the ethics report. And even if the measure went down to defeat, it's the kind of thing Sean Casten can keep doing. He could do it over and over and over again. And whether or not the full ethics report was ever shown the light of day by Congress, it would certainly keep it in the news. And Republicans really want this whole mess to go away. Not that it's the only mess. Oh, mais non, it is not the only mess. Now that they've successfully convinced Gates that he's got to go, he doesn't want to be a distraction. I just don't want to be a distraction. No, you didn't have the votes. And you were going to make your boss, your potential boss, look like a loser. And you know, Matt Gaetz, that is the one thing Donald Trump will not tolerate. You do something to make him look like a loser, then you have created an enemy for life. Remember, he resigned from Congress, said he was going to be AG. Trump was all in on it, kept pushing it. The only way this could end is the way it did. Matt Gaetz realizing that his win-win position suddenly looked like a lose-lose position. And nobody wants that. Now, the question is, he said when he was planning to be Attorney General, he said that he would not be returning to Congress. But he was reelected to his seat. So shall we set our timers? You know, right now we're getting I don't want to be a distraction. But my guess is it will be 24 hours or less before we get the social media post that says, well, I didn't want to be a distraction, and now I am so excited about rejoining the 119th Congress. You think you were going to get rid of Gaetz? You think you were going to get rid of Gaetz that easily? The good thing, though, is that now that Matt Gaetz has withdrawn his name, now we can focus on Pete Hegseth and the rape charges against him. He paid off at least one, if not two women. He admits to just because he didn't want them to be out there telling their story. And this is he's arguing that he did have sex with this woman who says he raped her, but he's arguing it was consensual. She says he fed her something. He gave her he drugged her. She said she woke up in the morning and didn't know where she was or what had happened. The night was a blank. After she went home, she started having these memory flashes where someone was sexually assaulting her. She went to the hospital and asked for a rape kit, which was done. This woman never called the police. The nurse, apparently, who did the rape kit, called the police. You might say, well, if she was raped, why not? You know what? Because our system of justice is not fair. And when you can't even remember what happened, how are you going to prove what happened? It's going to be a he said, she said. And we know how that turns out. Frankly, the women who actually bring rape charges are some of the bravest women in the world, because it's a nightmare. Everything about the woman goes on trial, not her rapist. What did she wear? Did she drink? What did she say? And this woman who went to the ER and ask for a rape kit, which, by the way, tested positive for semen. She was also, the medical professionals noted that she had a bruise on her leg. And that's the woman Pete Hegseth paid off. So now that Matt Gaetz is out of the picture, apparently the Democrats and some Republicans are going to focus all of that attention on Mr. Hegseth. Yeah. And let's see, we got rid of one sexual predator. Now we're going to focus on another sexual predator. And maybe after that, we can focus on Linda McMahon, who is involved in a lawsuit accusing her of willfully ignoring the fact that one of her employees at WWE was sexually assaulting young boys, and that she knew about it and didn't do anything about it. Only the best people. Only the best people. It's like he looked at the bottom of the barrel and said, no, that's not low enough. Is there another barrel under the barrel? A lower barrel that has even more gook at the bottom that we can dig through to find people? Pete Hegseth, we are looking at you now. All that Matt Gaetz attention, all that Matt Gaetz energy, Pete, it's coming your way. We are opening up the phone lines, 773-763-9278, 773-763-9278. Lady B is back at the studio, ready to take your call. Of course, I have more to say. Don't I always? I mean, do you wish there was some day where I said, oh, you know what, that's everything. I'm done. No. Let's take a break. Give Lady B some time to get on the phone lines, and I will decide what my next ranting subject is going to be right after this.
There's no excuse to miss Joan Esposito.
It's number one on my stereo.
Live, local, and progressive. You can listen to her daily at WCPT820.com on your computer or phone. Choose Views with Richard Chew.
General Grant on the show yesterday. He thought that you would be an excellent candidate for mayor of Chicago.
Eric's a great guy, y'all. We've had that conversation before. I'm going to agree with him. However, there is a person that I am dutifully and lovingly married to. I'm going to stay married until I die, not because I decided to throw my hat in the ring to run for mayor of the city of Chicago. That's my very political answer and response.
Richard Chew, weekday mornings at 6.
This November, there's a lot to be grateful for, like finding your new Porsche from the Porsche Exchange in Highland Park. Stop in today to test drive the latest models, including the 2024 Cayenne. And right now, lease the new 2024 Macan for only $799 a month for 39 months. Visit the Porsche Exchange in Highland Park or PorscheExchange.com. $8,649.13 due at signing. Excludes tax, title, license, and dock fee. No security deposit required. Expires 12/2/24.
Hey Google, play WCPT.
Streaming Chicago's progressive talk from TuneIn.
Joan Esposito. Join the conversation now at 773-763-9278.
I'm trying to use the phone!
Joan Esposito. Live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
Excuse me. Out in that darn snow. Haven't gotten a cold yet, but just give me time. Just give me time, because you know I am a delicate flower. I am. Don't you laugh. I'm a delicate flower. Later today, we're going to be talking to Eric Zorn. Today's Picayune Sentinel is jam full of topics. I'm sure we won't get to half of them. One of the things he touches on is this whole controversy with Mika Brzezinski and Joe Scarborough of MSNBC, Morning Joe, and how they apparently requested and were granted a meeting down at Mar-a-Lago with Donald Trump. Brian Seltzer over at CNN says his sources tell him that they did it because they were very worried about personal retribution. I think it's Steve Bannon has already started posting about certain journalists and how the Donald Trump DOJ is going to come after them. And if you're a producer like at MSNBC, you better lawyer up. The threats are very real. Mika and Joe, their argument did have anything to do with the fact that they personally felt threatened. It was more along the lines of, the voters have spoken. He's going to be the next president. Why wouldn't we talk to him? Which is kind of the position Eric Zorn in the Picayune Sentinel. And, he said that, everybody's like, oh, my God, they bent the knee, they kissed the ring, they capitulated. He said, well, we'll wait and see. The proof will be in how they cover Trump and his administration. Do they make excuses? Do they try to soften what's happening? Or do they go after him when he does bad things the way they've done before? And, it's not like, they said the meeting was really cordial. Joe Scarborough was like, yes, we discussed, really important things, really like immigration and mass deportation. And Joe made it sound like, he almost made it sound like he and Mika were like trying to tell him that a lot of this stuff is a really bad idea. Do they not know this man? So anyway, they have this meeting. Trump gives them a meeting. And then he goes, after they leave, he goes on his social media accounts and he rips them. Joe begged to meet with me after our big win. And when I finally agreed, he approached me like a scolded dog. He should consider himself lucky I didn't have him thrown out of beautiful Mar-a-Lago. I hope they got what they wanted, because they've also gotten a whole lot of grief for doing this. On The View, earlier this week, Ana Navarro talked about them going to see Donald Trump. She wasn't crazy about the idea, but she also kind of was like going to see, maybe we should take a wait-and-see attitude. Ana Navarro, I thought, was very clear-eyed about this little trip to Mar-a-Lago by two of the MSNBC hosts. I want to share with you what she had to say about it. Listen to this.
There is a sobering reality, right, which is that we have... in 2016, I think people voted for the unknown and voted thinking maybe the gravitas of the office was going to change him. It didn't. In 2024, people voted knowing who he was. And nothing that he is doing, as concerning as I find it and disturbing as I find it, should be shocking, because he told us he was going to do these things. Yeah. He was surrounded by the people he's appointing, and he is keeping to his word, and people voted for him knowing that. And so it's hard. It's a sobering truth. It's hard to reconcile that with what we have been doing for the last 8 years. I will never sit with him. I don't think I'm going to have to. I don't think I'm going to have to make a decision, because I don't think I'm ever going to get invited. And listen, the truth of the matter is, as we know around this table, that it is hard to criticize and denounce the abuses of power by Donald Trump when he is president. We have been there before. Mm-hmm. It means threats. It means death threats. It means retribution against your family. It means crazy things showing up at your house. It means lawsuits. It means all sorts of things. We've done it before, and if we have to do it again, we will do so again, I think there's a lot of people who are probably looking at what Joe and Mika did and find it opportunistic. There are people who change their stripes, or maybe their spots, I should say, today, depending on who is in power and what benefits them. I don't know that that's what they are doing. And to me, it's a to-be-determined situation because right now it's the transition. We don't know what he's going to do as president. We don't know what they're going to do if he commits abuses of power as president. So, you know, everybody has to live with their decision. Everybody has to look at themselves in the mirror. I'm good.
We will see. I generally don't watch. I read in the morning. I don't like to watch television. I don't start watching the news till a little bit later. And you know, I always try to keep an eye on different sources to see if there's any breaking news while we're on the air. So I won't be the one to report to you whether or not Joe and Mika have sold out, whether or not they are softening their stance. You've got to remember, they were on board with Trump when he was first elected in 2016. They were Trump supporters. And then they saw what he was doing and who he was, and they became very virulently anti-Trump. Who knows? Who knows where they will be now? Marty is on the line from Chicago. Let's take his call right now. Hey, Marty, how are you?
Hey, I'm doing very well. Thanks for taking my call. I just wanted to also chime in that I think they might be kissing up to who's ever going to buy MSNBC because it's up for sale. And, you know, if one of those right-wing, you know, moguliths grab a hold of MSNBC, you know, who knows what, you know, reporters are still going to have the same platform they have now. I mean, Rachel Maddow might be. What
Marty's talking about is Comcast, which is the parent company. Comcast has decided that they've got this whole big portfolio of NBC-related stations, and they've decided that they only want to keep the ones that they feel they can really sell and make money off of. So they are spinning off. They're going to keep NBC News and Peacock, and apparently they're going to keep Bravo because they feel that Bravo is a good channel to feed programming to Peacock. But everything else, MSNBC, CNBC, it's up for sale. Either it's going to be up for sale either as kind of a package to somebody, or in any way, shape, or form that they can dump it. All of their other stuff, NBC News is going to be one thing. They're going to keep Peacock. They're going to keep Bravo. And the rest of it is now up for sale. So if you've got a few $1 billion, I think Marty and I will help shepherd a deal. We'll all buy MSNBC. What do you think, Marty?
Yeah, I'm right there with you. You know, we need more. We need less hate, right-wing just hate nonsense, you know, which is what needs to be fed on all of the other so-called news channels.
And, you know, Marty, they've already got Fox Cable. They've got OANN. They've got Newsmax. It's not like there's a lot of emptiness in the right-wing media television market, you know? It's and then we have poor little MSNBC all by itself trying to hold down the other end of the seesaw. So I really, it's going to be interesting to see who, if anybody buys that.
Right, I'll be keeping an eye on that. And maybe Joe and Mika have an idea. I don't know.
Maybe. I don't know. Marty, thanks for the call. Appreciate it. Let's go to our good friend Dave, who is on the line from Hoffman Estates. Hey, Dave, how are you today? Oh, wait, Dave. Dave, are you there? Dave? Hang on a second, Dave. I took your call, and I just realized I need to take a break. So, Dave, hang on. On the other side of this commercial, we're going to talk to you. We'll be right back after this.
Take Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive, with you on the go by using the TuneIn app on your phone. Just search for WCPT 820.
This is Chicago's Progressive Talk, 820 AM, WCPT Willow Springs, and online at WCPT820.com, where facts matter.
Now back to Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
It is our tradition here, except for Fridays where we take calls for the first half of the show. We always take calls for the first hour in my intermittent news reports and mini rants. We were just getting ready to talk to Dave from Hoffman Estates when I rudely cut him off for a commercial break. He is still there patiently waiting for me. Hey, Dave, thanks for the call today.
Yeah, hey, Joan, along the lines when you're talking about with that Joe and Mika, remember back in 2016 when they almost every day they took his calls in. It was almost like free campaign time, you know.
Yep.
And
they were big supporters.
Oh yeah. And until the last trip to Mar-a-Lago, if I recall right. Remember, a little fuzzy on the stuff, but remember that's when Trump said something that Mika had blood running from her eyes.
Oh yeah, when he turned on them. Mika just had a facelift and there was blood running down her face, and it was not good.
And the barrel you spoke of, perhaps there's a false bottom on that barrel.
You know, I think there must be several false bottoms, because you could not pick a worse cabinet if you had names on a dartboard and were just throwing random darts.
Yeah. And, I was mentioning to Lady B in that the other day where he had that representative, I believe, I don't know if it's senator or just Congress, but wanting to stop that new representative, that transgender one, from using the woman's bathroom or whatever.
Oh, yeah. Delaware Congresswoman-elect Sarah McBride is the first openly transgender person elected to Congress, and Nancy Mace, who by all accounts, she's like Marjorie Taylor Greene. She wants attention desperately. And so she made a big stink about how women's bathrooms have to be only for women who were born women by birth. And then, of course, Mike Johnson, who can't afford to alienate the nut jobs, said, "Oh yeah, that's I'm going to make that rule. You can only use the bathroom of the sex you were born with." And I don't know if you saw this, Sarah McBride. First of all, she's a congressperson, so she has a private bathroom in her office. Secondly, a lot of the bathrooms on Capitol Hill, they're not men or women; they're just bathrooms. They're generic. So it's only the small number of bathrooms that say women that Mike Johnson, we're not going to know. We're going to have a rule about that. Sarah McBride, I really thought, Dave, that she would be very angry about this. Instead, she took the high road and she posted on social media. Here's her statement. It's only 3 paragraphs. "I'm not here to fight about bathrooms. I'm here to fight for Delawareans and to bring down costs facing families. Like all members, I will follow the rules as outlined by Speaker Johnson, even if I disagree with them. This effort to distract from the real issues facing this country hasn't distracted me over the last several days, as I've remained hard at work preparing to represent the greatest state in the union come January. Serving in the 119th Congress will be the honor of a lifetime, and I continue to look forward to getting to know my future colleagues on both sides of the aisle. Each of us were sent here because voters saw something in us that they value. I've loved getting to see those qualities in the future colleagues that I've met, and I look forward to seeing those qualities in every member come January. I hope all of my colleagues will seek to do the same with me. Delaware Congresswoman-elect Sarah McBride.
Yeah. It's kind of funny how they these Republicans, they let their imaginations run away with them. It seems like they've got a short memory. They kind of conveniently forgot it was one of their own. Remember back when Senator from Utah, Larry Craig, who got arrested at the Minneapolis airport for lewd conduct in a men's bathroom, and then his excuse, I got a wide stance, and
yeah, he was doing some weird stuff with his feet that some people said was like a signal in case the person in the other stall was gay, and it was very bizarre. It was very bizarre.
It's kind of like that, I've always said before, you point your finger, there's three pointing back at you. But, Joan, I'll close with this one. Let me direct this one to you and to some that would have been around 18 years old back in 1968, which, we know the scab isn't quite formed on VP Harris's loss. But the question I'm asking, those of you that were at voting age there in 1968, which loss was worse to the hope for our country? Was it the assassination of Senator Robert F. Kennedy or Vice President Kamala Harris? And I asked a couple of loved ones that I know that were around back then at that age, and they've said Kennedy. And, what say you? I'm thinking with yourself or Jim or Bobby from Indiana and stuff like that, if they happen to call in.
Well, let's face it, it's like two tragic things. Which is the bigger tragedy? They were both awful. Okay. That's my response to you, Dave. I mean, they were absolutely both awful. You could argue that winning or losing an election isn't on a par with winning or losing a life, and I would certainly go along with that. But both were bad. Both were bad.
I just figured from what I've read, he was really, seemed pretty loved by most, like the blacks and everybody that they.
Yeah, he was a good guy. Unlike his son, he was a good guy.
Right.
Dave, thanks for the call. Yeah.
All right, Joe. Thank you.
We have Ed from Palos Park on the line. Hello, Ed. Thanks for the call today.
Hi, Joan. Joan, I would like to reflect on the election, even though it was 2.5 weeks ago.
Reflect away, my friend.
I've come to the conclusion that Trump and his toadies orchestrated one of the biggest cons on the United States since elections began. His entire campaign was nothing but innuendos, conspiracy theories, blatant lies, degradation of opponents, and so on and so forth. And it's hard for me to believe that people in this country just couldn't see through it. I mean,
I know. Isn't it?
He came up with, for example, the Springfield, Ohio, eating dogs and cats. I mean, how ridiculous. It was never proven.
And matter of fact, the Republican local officials came out repeatedly and said that is not happening. Yes, and sadly, Ed, a follow-up to that story, which I haven't mentioned on the air, there are reports, the Haitian community living in Springfield, Ohio, is there legally. They are legal immigrants. But I read shortly after the election that a number of those families are considering moving. They want to go somewhere else because they feel that they may be targets. And isn't that a sad day?
It is. Decent, hardworking people just trying to make a productive life for themselves, and that they had encountered something of that nature. But on and on it goes, and I'm glad to hear today that Gates dropped out, or as you said, he didn't have the votes. And I was feeling very positive that he was not going to make it. And like you said, our next step is to get rid of this Hedge, this guy that also has sexual charges. Yeah. And I think if we stay strong and stick together, this might not be as bad as we're thinking it is. And one thing I was thinking of, the song by the late John Lennon, Imagine, it has some beautiful words in there that would correlate with the current atmosphere of the nation. And if you listen to those lyrics, how appropriate they are at this stage, that would help to, make people feel better, console them a little better, and realize we do have a future, even though this maniac is in office. So,
we have to live through the future. We have to get to the other side of this. I don't want to trudge through what's coming, and I know, Ed, you don't either, but we don't have much of a choice. Though I did read that there was a village in Italy that was willing to sell houses to Americans for $1 if they would pick up and move over to this tiny village, and I don't even know where in Italy it is. So, Ed, let's keep that in our back pocket, okay?
Oh, for sure, yeah. My wife's Italian, and she'd go there in a heartbeat.
Thanks for the call, Ed. I really appreciate it. Let's talk to our good friend Jim from Chicago before we go to our next break. Hey, Jim, how are you?
Hi, Joan. I'm happy to hear that J.D. Vance has his afternoons free before he has to volley around. Yeah, I'm glad he's got his because he's going to have to gear up. Because to me, this cabinet is the casting of Midsummer's Night's Dream by Shakespeare, because these characters are so strange that you go on and on about it. But it was a guy from Georgetown, professor from Georgetown, I heard last night. He goes, Trump is giving the middle finger to science and medicine by picking Robert Kennedy Jr. and Dr. Oz. He's just giving him the finger because Dr. Oz, Dr. Oz is they have the nerve. I'm not thinking of Dr. Oz. So he must have had relatives who were on Medicare or Social Security or Medicaid. These people must have had known somebody that benefited by some of these programs, but yet they want to destroy him. And I think that what do you think? I think 2025 is going to be so overreaching and so ambitious that I think the American public, even the ones that were silly enough to vote for Trump, will be repulsed by it. Don't you think, Joan?
I think they absolutely will. I think that a lot of people who voted for Donald Trump didn't think that he really was, they believed him when he said he didn't want to do anything in Project 2025, which is, of course, a big lie. And when he starts doing some of the things, there was just a report in the Washington Post this morning that Tom Homan, the guy who under Trump last time managed the child separation policy, Tom Homan, a fine human being, has said that he will happily accept the state of Texas's offer for a 1,400-acre plot of land where they can build one of their deportation camps. So, yeah, I think it's going to be ugly. I think they are going to try to put Project 2025 into effect. The only good news is that because they published it, there are a lot of people familiar with government and lawyers who now are ready. They know what's coming, and they have prepared different ways and different lawsuits to try to fight back and, at the very least, slow it down.
And that's where they want to put the Ten Commandments in real quick, Joe. Can you imagine that? That's where the state where they want to have, from kindergarten to fifth grade, the Ten Commandments taught in Texas. And they're completely opposite of anything in the Ten Commandments. I can guarantee you that. Anyway, thanks for taking my call, Joan. Have a good show.
Thank you, Jim. Always appreciate the call. We are going to take a break. We're going to be back with more of your calls right after this.
Get social with WCPT 820 and follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at WCPT 820.
WCPT 820, Chicago's progressive talk, where facts matter.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
We are taking the first hour of our show to answer your calls. I didn't mention this, but you probably saw where the Illinois Supreme Court overturned Jussie Smollett's conviction. Remember, Kim Foxx first said she was going to stay out of it, and then her office brought all these charges, and she said to her lawyers, that's ridiculous, that's overkill. We're going to, cancel all the charges. And then some people who were not very fond of Kim Foxx managed to get a special prosecutor. That was Dan Webb. And he looked the case over and he was like, oh, he should have been charged with this, this, and this. And he did. And Jussie Smollett was found guilty. The Illinois Supreme Court has now ruled that that should never have happened. That not exactly double jeopardy, but basically, it was overkill. Dan Webb has released a statement saying, look, this may have been overturned. That doesn't mean the guy wasn't guilty. So what a mess. That whole Jussie Smollett thing was a mess. And while there may or may not have been charges that should have been brought against him, at the very least maybe filing a false police report, for a guy who was clearly not rowing with both oars, it really felt like it was retribution to Kim Foxx when it was decided that a special prosecutor needed to look into this and then bring charges and everything, whether or not he had committed a crime. It felt like they were going after her. That's what it felt like to me. And, of course, nobody involved in that. I love Dan Webb dearly. Nobody involved in that is going to say, yeah, I guess I shouldn't have done it. That's not how big-time lawyers work. So anyway, what a mess. It continues to be a mess. Let's hope the mess is over and we never have to talk about Jussie Smollett ever again. Ron from Chicago is on the line. Hey, Ron, how are you today? Thank you for the call.
Yeah, it's pretty good. RFK Jr. has also been accused of misbehaving. So
oh, yeah.
About that.
Yeah, he was feeling up the babysitter. She said that she walked into, the pantry or something to get something, and he came in behind her and started kind of rubbing her up and down. And, yeah, and he's also admitted, I don't know if it's the same babysitter or a different one, but he actually had sex with one of their babysitters. And he's the guy whose wife kept accusing him, his first wife kept accusing him of having affairs, and he kept telling her she was crazy, it wasn't happening. And then she found his journal, his sex journal, where he listed all the people that he had had sex with and some rather unsavory details about those liaisons. Guess she wasn't crazy after all, though sadly, he kept telling people she's just crazy, and her mental health got very poor, and she ended up killing herself. And he was like, see, I told you she was crazy. Oh, he's a fine human being. Oh, yes, definitely.
I don't think it was a coincidence that yesterday Susan Wild was at the ethics committee meeting, and today that Matt Gaetz dropped out. I don't think that was coincidence. I think there was a connection in it.
Yeah. Well, she was not. They had somebody else in mind for DOJ. And Matt Gaetz and somebody else went to Trump when she wasn't around. And they were like, you should name me. You should name me head of DOJ, and I will do anything you want, anywhere, anyhow. I will be your guy. And, this works out well for me. It works out well for you because you get somebody who's fiercely loyal. And that this was not done with Susan Wild's knowledge or approval. It was presented to her as a done deal. Because Trump, once he makes a decision, he's going to post on social media about it. Hey, guys, Matt Gaetz, he's my guy.
Right. And one more thing, that Mike Johnson, didn't he break the law by trying to cover up for Matt Gaetz? Isn't there something kind of, twisted about that situation?
Well, it doesn't speak well about his character, but he was trying to get this ethics report suppressed. He felt. You got to remember, I think we think of Mike Johnson as like an independent person. I think, Ron, we have to realize Mike Johnson is a sock puppet. Mike Johnson has no ideas of his own. He has nothing he wants to accomplish. He is simply Donald Trump's sock puppet. And that's it. Donald Trump says jump, and Mike Johnson says, how high, sir? He's a nothing. He's a placeholder.
And when the music starts, he starts dancing. That's the way.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Thank you. All right.
Thank you, Ron. Appreciate the call. Let's go to our other Ron. This one is calling in from Michigan. Hey, how are you?
Hi, Joan. Okay. You had a caller, I think it was Bobby. He said the comparison between, I didn't clearly hear the question, but I got it was the defeat of Kamala Harris worse than the assassination of RFK? Was that his question?
Yeah, it was Dave from Hoffman Estates, and yeah, he's
okay. I'm one of those people. Okay, I was Kennedy's assassination, the second Kennedy. That was a year later. I went to Vietnam, but even with those thoughts of Vietnam, 100 guys dying a week, 200 guys dying a week, 300 guys dying a week. Still, the feeling of at least me, I felt more confident in my country that there were still Republicans that were against the war in Vietnam, not many, and there were Democrats who were against the war. There was a large protest movement in the United States, and I didn't know about the protest movement in the military till I got there and joined it. But today it's far worse in my opinion. I hate to be a doom and gloomer, but I've seen the battles I've lived through I volunteered for Vietnam to fight against the war, and but now it's I hate to say it, it's like overwhelming, and even Tom Hartman has said on his show that if there is an election next come, it's probably going to be pro-functionary. They'll have already locked down all the ways and means. They'll give us a few. Here, I'll give you an example of it in Michigan. In Michigan, they say, I don't believe it really, that we went for Trump, but we still elected the Democratic senator, Mrs. Slotkin. And that was a conscious effort by the Republicans to punish, in my opinion, Rogers, the Republican candidate, because he spoke out against Trump before when he was in office or running for office. And the voters in Michigan, the racists, again, and you can't, yes, it is the racists that came out, and they put Slotkin in, the Democrat, for senator, and made sure to punish Rogers, the Republican, for speaking out against Trump.
Maybe I'm not. The only thing I know about the race in Michigan is that Ms. Slotkin won by a very, 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 very narrow margin. But in Michigan, remember, there was also a pretty good-sized block that voted for Jill Stein. Now, generally, the rule of thumb is that it tends to be Democrats, disaffected Democrats, that Jill Stein pulls off. So, chances are the Republican who barely lost, had those Jill Stein votes gone a different way, the thinking is the majority would have been Democratic, and he would have lost with a greater margin. What the feelings were about the Republican Party, about their candidate, I honestly haven't done that deep a dive into Michigan, but I will tell you, I talked to Alyssa Slotkin when I was at the Democratic National Convention, and man, oh man, is she impressive. She reminds me of legislators of old. She's educated. She's served her country. She's smart. She's tough. And it kind of reminds me back with the era you're talking about around Vietnam, when it felt like there were more, not that everybody was, but it felt like there were more people of character. It felt like there were more people who really did see being elected to higher office as a calling and a way to serve the country, not simply a way to get more likes and clicks.
Yes, you're right, Joan. But thank goodness you're still fighting, and I'll still keep fighting as much as I can, but it's hard times. And they haven't even started yet. So.
Well, yeah, we got to stick together, and we gotta put one foot in front of the other, Ron. We'll do it together, okay? You and me.
Thank you, Joan.
Thank you.
The struggle continues.
Yes, my friend, it definitely does. Thanks for everybody who called. We are going to be taking a break for news, and when we come back, we are going to be joined by the absolutely lovely Eric Zorn. I don't know if you've had a chance to read today's Picayune Sentinel. Today, I believe, the Thursday edition, is free. You can go to, you can just send Eric an email and he'll sign you up for it. So we are going to be, he covers a lot of ground today, so I'm going to have to pick and choose which of the things he talks about we're going to hit on. But we will be joined by former Chicago Tribune columnist, currently founder of the Picayune Sentinel newsletter, right after this.
The Thom Hartmann radio program provides all of the intelligence, information, and insight you'll need to win the water cooler wars. Weekdays 11 to 2 right here on WCPT 820, Chicago's progressive talk, where facts matter. This is WCPT 820, where facts matter.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive.
The reason that I listen to you from the infamous other side, you will call a spade, and if it's indefensible, you will not defend it. And you know what? I can respect that.
On WCPT 820.
Lady B is trying to connect with Eric Zorn right now. We're having a little bit of technical trouble. So remember I told you he covered so many things in today's Picayune Sentinel that I wasn't sure what we were going to be able to get to. He starts off today. I don't know if you heard this. You remember how Mayor Brandon Johnson wanted a $300 million property tax increase, and 50 older people out of 50 voted that down. Okay. Now he says, well, he only needs $128 million, not $300. And he has said that a big portion of this money would come from an increase in the personal property lease tax on cloud computing. Okay. Eric goes into exactly what that means. And if I understand it correctly, it means like if you stream or if you like pay a fee to use Microsoft Outlook or something like that, apparently there's a tax on that, and that text would be bigger. Eric is here. We've connected with him now. Eric, maybe you can say that a little bit more cogently than I just did. How are you, my friend?
I'm good. Sorry about the technical problems. I was hearing you, but I couldn't. You couldn't hear me, or Lady B couldn't hear me. But anyway, here I am. So let's talk about this.
So you went into a deep dive of exactly what that means, and I'm pretty sure I followed along. And this is something apparently, because he said he's going to raise the tax. So apparently, like, we're already paying a tax. Like, if we pay Dropbox to use that service, that's one of the things that would be taxed at a higher rate. Do I have that right?
I mean, obviously, you're not writing a check for that, but Dropbox is. It's charging a tax. Just like when you stream Netflix right now, you're paying a tax, and your cell phone, you're paying a tax, and all these things. And essentially, I kept reading these references in the stories. You know, the backup story, the big story here is that Brandon Johnson needs to raise $300 million, and he was going to do it all in property taxes, and the city council said, heck no, you're not going to do that. So now they're looking for all kinds of other revenue streams. We can talk about bunch of them if you want, but certainly they're talking about increasing the garbage collection fee and the tax on alcohol and things like that. But one of the ones that just kept jumping out at me was they wanted the personal property lease tax on cloud computing from 9%, where it is now, to 11%. They said it would raise $128 million, which is a lot. I talked to Ralph Martiri at the Center for Budget, and he was telling me that that this tax raises about $600 million a year. And essentially what it is they tax if you are renting something, and you're paying a tax and you rent something. And they are considering when you have access to a database and some sort of remote software that you are renting that, and that is not a service, but it's a product. So they're charging you as though it's almost a form of a sales tax. So if you have, like, say, the LexisNexis database, or if you have Dropbox, or if you are renting Microsoft Word, there is a tax that is attached to your bill on that, and that's being paid by Microsoft or Dropbox. I mean, they're based elsewhere. Dropbox is based in San Francisco, so there's really no local connection at all. It's just that you happen to be in town, and so they're charging you 9% now. It's going to be 11% going forward. They kept seeing these references to it. I just didn't understand it.
Nor did I.
I talked to Samantha Breslow at the law firm of Kilpatrick, Townsend, and Stockton. She's written about this online, written about what it means. And I sort of broke down the expression. Personal property is anything that can be moved, like a vehicle, equipment, livestock, and so on. And it's distinct from real property, which is stuff that can't be moved, like your house and your.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I guess you can technically move your house if you want to pay enough, but your house, and your land, and so on. So they put a tax on personal property because they look for ways to raise money. And
they do, and maybe I'm cynical, Eric, but it sort of seems to me announcing this particular tax, which most people, I would be willing to bet, don't understand, is maybe a way to get a tax passed that people will agree to, because it doesn't seem like it's a real tax. It's not like a property tax. It's not like an increased tax on eggs or something else that we can readily understand. It seems kind of obscure, and I'm wondering if it's obscure on purpose.
Yeah, I wonder that too. You remember, maybe was it 10 years ago? I can't remember now, when the city just went crazy when Tony Preckwinkle tried to impose a 1 penny soda tax, an extra penny on soda, and people just went crazy over that. And this tax, it's going to raise. I would think that if it were just a little bit of money, I think I would have skimmed over. But $128 million, that means that a lot of people are paying a lot extra. For their, I mean, if you're raising it from just 2%, from 9 to 11%, and suddenly there's $128 million, that means this is really hitting a lot of customers. And I was talking to, like I say, to Samantha Breslow, and she was saying that it only applies to businesses and users in Chicago. If you are identified by your zip code as living in Chicago, then you get charged that. And businesses are able to try to do some bookkeeping if they say, well, we're based in Chicago, but a lot of our employees are using this software out in the suburbs where there is no such tax, then they don't get charged for that. But it's clearly a lot of money that's coming in just for the privilege of using, like I say, Dropbox or any of these places that charge you money for cloud storage. There's all kinds of places where you back up your data and so on. And I guess the idea behind it is like, well, you could buy a 5 terabyte hard drive and you pay a sales tax on that, and in a sense you are you're renting space on a huge hard drive somewhere else, and they want to charge you for that privilege of renting it. And again, there's no real connection between what the city offers in the way of infrastructure or services and this tax. They're just taxing it because they can, kind of like a sin tax, where they just say, we're going to charge you for this because we think we can get away with it.
Yeah.
And the tax on streaming services, which a lot of people don't really realize or don't follow, which is like when you get Netflix or Apple TV or any of these things, you're paying every month for that. You are paying on top of that a tax. And it looks in some ways like when a business is having to pay this for the use of software, and, staff management software and all kinds of other things that are remotely accessed. And that's the way computing is going now, is you renting software rather like with Photoshop.
I know, and I hate that. As painful as it was to buy those discs and load them up, at least it was mine. And it was mine, and now I sort of feel like I'm at their mercy. You know what? Whenever it comes time for budgets, particularly when people get in the weeds with this kind of stuff, do you remember that movie with Kevin Kline, Dave, where the president is like in a coma, so they find this guy who looks exactly like him, and they tell him to pretend to be the president until the real president recovers. And it comes time for the budget, and so he calls his friend back from his hometown, who's an accountant, and has his friend come to Washington, gives him the whole budget, and says, okay, you need to go through this and figure out where we can cut. And this everyday accountant who's used to looking at the nuts and bolts of people's lives actually finds places in the budget that can be cut without, horribly hurting people. And I kind of wish we could find that guy, the everyday accountant who just is very, very practical and could sit down even with the budget for the city of Chicago and say, wait a minute, we're buying 4,000 T-bolts. We only need 600 T-bolts. Let's not buy those extra T-bolts. We can screw together all the things we need with the 600 we've got.
Well, you probably heard what Vivek Ramaswamy said the other day. He and Elon Musk are going to be running the Department of, what was it?
Efficiency, government efficiency.
Department of Government Efficiency. He said you could cut the government workforce in half by saying any government employee whose Social Security number ends in an odd number is fired. So you could cut the employee budget in half, and then you could cut that again in half by saying anyone whose Social Security, any remaining person whose Social Security number begins with an odd number, you're fired too. So you could reduce the federal budget payroll by 75%. But of course, that really risks cutting extremely essential services along with perhaps some of the redundant services that you're talking about or unnecessary services. And that's the kind of meat axe that it looks like Elon Musk and Ramaswamy are going to take to the budget. You do exactly need what you're talking about. You need to have people who are really smart about what's going on in government, who know which programs are effective, which programs are overstaffed, where there's too much middle management and so on. And that needs to happen federally. It needs to happen at the city, too. I'm not sure that there's $300 million in waste in the city government. There might be. It takes someone...
Well, it didn't sound like he was interested in finding or cutting waste. I mean, we're going to get rid of all of the therapists for the police department, because no, they don't have a higher than normal suicide rate. That's a fine thing. And the one thing that maybe getting into the weeds again, but maybe you know more about this. I know that Kwame Raoul let Brandon Johnson know that the people who were hired to make the consent decree a part of our reality. There's an office, and there's like 60-some people who work there. And Brandon Johnson wanted to cut the staff from 65 down to 28. And Kwame Raoul said, you know what? We will take you to court. We will find you in contempt. But on the other hand, and correct me if I'm wrong, because I sure hope this is wrong, I read something just within the last week that said, of all the recommendations in the consent decree, which we've had for a while now, 7% of them have been implemented. And if we have a staff of 65 employees working on this for quite a while now, and 7% is as good as it's gotten, I don't know, Eric. Maybe we should be cutting that office down.
Well, or they need to make it more robust. I'm not sure exactly what that means. There's all kinds of data on this that they come out, and certain percentage has been partially implemented, other percentages, and so the whole total is like 7%. But the progress has been slow. And I'm not sure it's certainly not all Mayor Brandon Johnson's fault, because it's been going on for a long time. And I'm not. When I read these stories again,
well, what are those 65 employees doing? They've been there for a while. I don't get that. I'm sorry. We have of all the big cities in this country that have had consent decrees, we are the slowest. We are the least implemented. I don't know why that is. I don't know what's going on behind the scenes. Maybe we got to turn this over to the BGA or Injustice Watch and have somebody really dig into the nuts and bolts. But it seems like we are not getting our money's worth. Yeah. That's what I'm trying to say.
Yes. Well, I am very frustrated by what I read about this, which is they talk about percentages of implementation, but I don't know what that means. Does that mean that the training hasn't been implemented? Does that mean that the performance reviews are not showing the progress that needs to be done? I don't know exactly what steps need to be taken, and I don't know what's taking so long or why it's so expensive. But these are all good questions, and I feel like the stories tend to gloss over that. And I would like to know more about it, because you're right. When you've got 65 employees, what are they doing all day?
Yeah.
And how come they're making so much? So how come they're not making as much progress? I think police reform is important, very important, and I'm glad we are under a consent decree to figure that out. But I also want to know, who is leaning on the shovel and who's working hard, and what they're coming up against that is giving them such poor progress ratings. So, yeah, it's a very interesting subject. I mean, all these things are, and Mayor Johnson does not want to cut. He doesn't want anyone to lose their jobs. He is very, very union friendly. And I understand that, and I know that some of these jobs would be hard to cut. On the other hand, you could do furloughs, which probably would not violate union contracts, and you could do some hiring freezes if that's necessary. But I do think that looking carefully at levels of management and departments and what they're doing, and what is urgent, what is critical mission stuff, what is key services, and what are things that can go. They need to start looking at that. Because Mayor Johnson today, one of his statements, I didn't have time to put this in the newsletter, it was in this morning's paper. He said that citizens of Chicago are not looking for no, they're looking for yes. And this guy does not know what the citizens of Chicago know. He took his 52% to whatever 48% victory over Paul Vallis as a mandate, as an understanding of what the entire city wants. The people, it's a very hard job. Running the city requires a deft balance of services and spending carefully. The city of Chicago, the residents of Chicago don't want just yes, more services. They want, they don't want to pay for them, I should say. I'm sure they want all the services they can get. But, they want a budget that's intelligently managed. They want they don't want property tax increases, pretty clearly. And they want efficiency in government. They want it to work well. And so sometimes that's a yes, but sometimes it's a no. And Johnson seems to have read his victory as a mandate to hike a lot of revenue and spend a lot of money on programs. And I think that a lot of his victory was the fact that he was running against Paul Vallis, and people didn't like the cut of Paul Vallis's jib, and that he really needed to govern with that in mind, that we have a divided city. He has a divided council. He's got his approval ratings are now in the teens. He no longer has a mandate to do much of anything. So he's got to work with the council and come up with these budget cuts. And he's got to do it in private. He's got to do it behind closed doors. One of the things that's very frustrating to me in watching this is how he'll come out. He comes out with this $300 million property tax increase. And he clearly hasn't run it by the council, because then the council votes 50-0 against it.
That's what I don't understand. Why? The one, whether or not you thought, Daley was a good mayor, Daley knew where the votes were. And if he was going to lose something, it didn't get brought up for a vote. What is the point, do you think? Because Brandon Johnson's not stupid. Is the point so that later he can just argue to voters, I tried, you saw, they shot me down. I went to the mat to try to, and now I'm really sorry that we've got to do this or we've got to do that because it wasn't me, because you saw, I tried. Do you think that's it? Is that the public relations play there?
I don't know what the play is. Brandon Johnson is not stupid, but he is not deft. politically. He's not savvy politically. He doesn't know. I mean, he thinks that he was given this mandate to do all these things, and he wasn't. He thinks that he can impose his will on the city the way the Mayor's Daily did, and he can't. And you're right. One of the ways that the Mayor's Daily and Mayor Emanuel, for that matter, would govern is they would do a lot of meetings. Before you announce something like a property tax increase, you are meeting with your alderman, in private meetings in groups of 2 and 3, talking to them, what do they need, what do they want, how is this going to work? That's how you assemble at least 26 votes. If you remember, the budget votes with all these mayors before this were like 48-2. Mm-hmm. There's a very smart way of handling that stuff. And these things have to be done behind closed doors. Another Brandon Johnson story this week. It's not really him. It's sort of, but it's Stacey Davis Gates and this open letter that she sends to Mayor Johnson, essentially demanding that he quickly order the school board to approve the teachers' budget requests in their contract negotiations. Do it now before the new school board takes over, because we can't afford a delay. And I understand why she wants that done, because once the newly elected school board, and just a reminder that 10 of them are elected now, and there'll be 11 appointed by the mayor. The mayor will still have control, but it's going to be a lot more. It's going to be a larger body. It's going to be more fractious. They're taking over in the middle of January. Stacey Davis Gates wants Johnson to get this contract done before then, because if you let the new school board in on it, then the negotiations may have to almost start again. I get that. But you don't do that by releasing an open letter that reminds everybody of one of the major misgivings that they have about Mayor Johnson, which is that he is a creature of the Chicago Teachers Union. He was an employee of the Teachers Union.
Again, I don't think either of these people is stupid. So did Brandon Johnson not take a meeting with her? Did Brandon Johnson do something that made her feel upset? Did he tell her we got to wait for the next school board? In other words, did she get so ticked off that she released that letter specifically to embarrass him?
I don't think that would be a very good poker play on her part. They're allies, and I think they're personal friends as well. And I can't imagine that she would think that this would be a way to pressure him. It might be a way to pressure a mayor with whom you are not so closely identified, whose campaign you didn't bankroll, who is not the person everyone says, oh, Mayor Johnson is a puppet of the Chicago Teachers Union. I mean, that's the sense that we have, that he fired the recent school board, or he got them to resign, and appointed 7 new people that he thought would be more compliant with what the teachers want and what he wants. I think they are in accord with what they want. And one problem with that is that when you have these labor negotiations with public unions, you want the politicians to be on the other side of the table from the union. You want them to be striking. They're representing the taxpayers. They're not representing the union. And what you have here, what it certainly looks like, is Mayor Johnson wants the city to be sitting on the same side of the table as the teachers union, and basically giving them whatever they want. And of course, that's very difficult to afford right now. And then there's this issue that he wanted to take out this enormous payday loan in order to meet the teachers' contract demands. And that's really bad for the city finances. And it also is totally kicking the can down the road, because you don't take out loans like that to meet operating expenses. You take out loans like that for projects that will ostensibly pay off down the line. But you don't take out payday loans at huge interest rates just in order to meet operating expenses. And so, I mean, that's one of the sticking points between the mayor and the CEO of the schools, Pedro Martinez. Pedro Martinez is wanting to take a more fiscally responsible tack and say, let's figure out a way not to have to do this loan. And Mayor Johnson is impatient, and he keeps throwing out this rhetoric about the schools, and he invokes race all the time, and he wants every school to have libraries and full arts programs and so on. And those are all really good goals, but the question of how to pay for it is not one that the union wants to engage, and it's certainly not one that Johnson seems to want to engage. And so they're not sitting on opposite sides of the table from each other. They're not representing, the taxpayers in the city who want good schools for sure, but they also want They want them to be responsibly budgeted. So that these are among the sort of missteps.
And another weird thing. I know that Brandon Johnson campaigned on that. He doesn't like the idea of magnet schools. He thinks all schools should have great resources. And, while I can't argue that, the magnet schools were created specifically to sort of take the best and the brightest and really make sure that they get through the system in a way that, guarantees a brighter future. So, but he doesn't, he said all neighborhood schools should have the same resources. Well, my daughter-in-law teaches at a magnet school, which I will not name, and she was very concerned that with all this stuff going on, that her school would be slated for closure. And I said, well, how many students do you have? And she said, well, she gave me a number, but she said, we used to have a lot more. But because kids would be bused to our school, and we used to have a decent attendance because kids would get bused to this magnet school. She said, but they did away with the busing. So now basically this magnet school has become a neighborhood school, but there aren't all that many kids in the neighborhood as opposed to what they had before. So you've taken a school that was successful, and just because you did away with the busing, you forced those bused kids to go to, one would imagine, a neighborhood school that doesn't have the resources, and a school that is perfectly primed to teach those kids now feels like it's on the chopping block because it doesn't live in a neighborhood where there's a huge number of students. It kind of seems like, well, on paper, the idea might have looked good. We want all the schools to be equal. The system we have was created for a reason. And maybe, down the road, 10 or 15 years, all the schools will be equal. But right now, it just kind of seems like everybody's getting screwed.
Right. Well, and of course, it's expensive to bus students from around the city to these magnet schools. You also have the issue of charter schools, which have drained population from some of these neighborhood schools. And the charter schools are public schools. They're publicly funded. They're privately managed, and often by superintendents and bureaucrats who make an awful lot of money. And so you have this situation where this patchwork of educational opportunities that's expensive. And ideally, the city I grew up in, everyone went to their neighborhood schools, and the neighborhood schools were pretty equal, and that was all fine, and no one ever really complained about it. Some kids, of course, went to private schools, Catholic schools, and so on. But
I went to a Catholic school that was academically in the toilet. So not all private schools are good academically. I think the high school I went to is very good now, but in my day,
Yeah, the idea that you should have neighborhood schools be of high quality is a really good one. The thing is that we ask our public schools to deal with a lot of things that we don't ask private schools to deal with, that private schools don't deal with. We have, like kids with learning disabilities, kids that come from really disadvantaged homes. They arrive at school without a lot of preparation. They have sometimes a lot of behavioral problems. Teachers, some people say, oh, the Chicago public schools are failing and so on. We ask our public schools to do a lot.
Yes, we do.
We ask them to do a lot more than we ask of the private schools. And then we say, well, look, you're not teaching well enough. The scores aren't up. And then, well, yeah, these kids come to school and they have tough home lives. They live in tough neighborhoods. They didn't get the kind of preparation or nurturing when they were younger. There are a lot of social pathologies and internal issues that kids have that the schools are asked to deal with and the teachers are asked to deal with. And I really reject the idea that the Chicago public schools are failing because they can't work miracles with some of these kids. I think most of the Chicago public school teachers that I know work really hard and they really care about their students.
Yeah.
I don't think a lot of them are just goofing off. I really don't. And
Eric, we're going to have to take a break. We're talking to Eric Zorn. We're talking about today's issue of the Picayune Sentinel. Eric and I will be back with much more after this.
Take Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive, with you on the go by using the TuneIn app on your phone. Just search for WCPT 820.
This is Chicago's Progressive Talk, 820 AM, WCPT Willow Springs, and online at WCPT820.com, where facts matter.
Now back to Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
I'm joined by former Chicago Tribune columnist Eric Zorn. He writes the Picayune Sentinel. Today is Thursday. If you are a subscriber, you get a special edition on Tuesday as well. And good news in today's Picayune Sentinel, I didn't see this anywhere else, that the Chicago Tribune newsroom, after 6 years, finally has a new contract, Eric?
Yeah, I was actually part of that union movement back 6 years ago when we were back in the Tribune Tower, and they were gathering signatures for union cards, and we were meeting and formulating our demands. This was actually before Alden Global Capital was even owned the Tribune. This was Tribune Publishing, and it was one of these situations where we weren't getting raises and the staff was diminishing, and we were worried about the quality of the journalism, so we formed a newsroom union, and we got the union cards and began negotiating with a company, and then Alden Global Capital came in, and we began negotiating with them, and it was just this incredibly slow process. The only advantage to it was that they couldn't lay anybody off. And so everyone was kind of stuck where they were, making what they were making, and they say not getting any raises. The 401ks were threatened, but no one was getting laid off, and that was a good thing. I left in 2021, 3.5 years ago. I took a buyout from Alden and went off on my own. And so, as did a whole bunch of us, Mary Schmeek and Darlene Glanton and all these other people, names people recognize, Steve Chapman. We all left at the same. John Cass left at the same time, and the negotiations continued. And I kept in touch with people from the newsroom, talked to them, and they would say, "Oh yeah, we think we're close. We think we're close," and they never could get there. And they had a strike. I don't know if you remember that. About maybe it was a year ago or so, there was a strike, a one-day strike where they didn't do anything for the paper, and that didn't make any impression, because the thing about newspaper strikes anymore is that everything is done electronically, and all the newsrooms are remote for the most part, so that it's easy enough to put out a paper without reporters anymore. They just use freelancers and wire copy, and they were able to put the paper out for that day. So the newsroom union lost a lot of leverage, and I think the Alden Global Capital, the hedge fund people, realized that, so they really played hardball with them in these negotiations. And they finally came through with a contract, and so, I mean, the contract has 2 years of consecutive raises and an immediate signing bonus to journalists who haven't had a raise since 2018. It also retains the 401k match. It raises minimum salaries to put the newsroom on a path to wage equity, because there was a problem that they had. In fact, there's a lawsuit that some of the employees filed because women and people of color were making less than their white counterparts. So they also received some protections against the use of artificial intelligence to write news stories. And I hope that they can keep that newsroom going. I think I really have a lot of respect.
So, yeah, that's what I was going to say. After 6 years of hemming and hawing and stalling, why now? Because they didn't do this just out of the goodness of their hearts. Why now?
That is a good question, and I think we'll see, because now they do have the right/opportunity to lay people off. And, the newsroom is pretty small now. They got about 80 people. I mean, and 80 people, it sounds like maybe it's a lot to put out a paper, but, the nutpaper is a daily miracle, everything that they do to get that paper out every day. And so it's not that well staffed. I mean, when I was there before, it was like 500 or 600 people were in the newsroom when I was there, in the 90s, when things were really going strong there. So it is a shell of itself in many ways. And I think that what you may see now that the union contract has been struck is you may start to see layoffs, which I would hate to see. The thing is that these money managers who run the place, they just are trying to extract the maximum amount of profit out of it. They don't care about journalism at all. They look at it as a
that's what a hedge fund does when they buy something that's struggling. They look at, generally from what I've been reading, and tell me if you agree with this, I've been reading that a lot of these hedge funds, that the reason that they even buy these struggling newspapers is a lot of time because it's a land deal. Like Alden got that big printing building. You know, they got all the land that then they sold off for the casino, and that the assets, the physical assets, especially any actual land, is a big part of what these hedge funds do. And then they squeeze the paper and they squeeze the paper. And when they decide they've gotten as much profit out of the paper as can possibly be gotten, then it's time to start selling off the assets.
Right. They haven't done that yet. They've owned the Denver Post for maybe a dozen years now, and they haven't sold that off yet, and it's still operating. I think with one of the problems they're going to have is that the coming generations do not get their news from newspapers, and when they do, they may get them from the newspapers' websites, but they don't get the newspaper delivered, and that's where the real money is for newspapers.
Really? Really?
Is in circulation. Yeah, I mean, think about it.
It's not in digital ads?
No, it's not really in digital ads. I mean, they're trying to do that with digital ads, but the money that comes in from subscribers, home delivery subscribers, is really important. And I've been writing about this, is that they are nickel and diming or dollaring their home delivery subscribers with these things. Like they charge $10 a month extra for these special Sunday inserts, and they don't really tell you what they are, and they do tell you they're charging you for them in a postcard they send to your house, but they don't. It's not like it's labeled or priced or anything like that. When you get the paper, you think, oh, look at this nice little NFL preview guide they have, and you don't realize that you're being charged $10 a month for that. So they're doing that kind of thing. It's a lot of kind of I call it shady tactics to try to keep people subscribing, and a lot of the people who subscribe to daily delivery, home delivery of a newspaper are older. You just don't see that in the younger generation. When I was in college, we got the paper delivered every day, and it was just a thing that we did. We grew up with that, and that's how we consume the news. But now, I mean, my kids, I've got 3 kids, none of them subscribe to a newspaper daily, and we don't subscribe to the paper daily anymore. I get the digital offering. I consume
the only
everything.
physical paper that I get delivered is the Saturday Wall Street Journal, just because that's the one that has the wine columnist and the other fun featurey stuff that I find that I like actually looking at in paper format rather than digitally. But that's the last paper coming to this house.
Yeah, we get the Sunday Tribune delivered at home because Johanna likes to hold it and read it. And I still read it on my iPad. I prefer to read newspapers on my iPad. I'm new school, I guess, that way. But what I'm saying is I think that the time is running out on that particular medium. That killing trees and then dumping 12-hour-old news on your
Well, why couldn't the Tribune go to where people are instead of worrying about getting more people to subscribe to a paper? Create a channel, the Chicago Tribune on YouTube. Maybe somebody in my demographic might not be drawn to that. But, I've talked to my kids. One's 26, 27, and 27, and one is 31. And, they don't subscribe to a paper, but they know what's going on in the world because of YouTube, because of Reddit, because of different things that they get delivered to their inbox.
Well, TikTok, and I think some of them Facebook. I think Facebook is more.
Facebook is for old people, I've been told. But the younger generation, I've been told Facebook is for old people.
Well, yeah, but yes, that is I think true. But I think things like TikTok, and a lot of people are. I mean, young folks are more into Instagram, and there is some news on Instagram. It's hard because you can't post links, clickable links on Instagram. But, yeah, I mean, people are getting their news through all kinds of different channels. They're getting their news through podcasts, too. They're getting their public affairs things through there.
I thought it was interesting. I read recently that the number one way to get a podcast is on YouTube. And I've been talking to younger people about this, and they all say, well, yeah, even though it's just like two people wearing sweatshirts with a microphone in their face on camera, they would rather see that. They want that video component. And I read recently there are more podcasts watched/listened to on YouTube than there are over like just the pure audio channels.
The iTunes things. Yeah. It seems possible to me. I don't have the patience to sit in front of a screen and watch somebody talk myself, but I know that that's a thing. And Joe Rogan is extremely popular, and his show, I think, is streamed live on YouTube, or at least on some video channels. So, yeah, I mean, I think what we're both saying here is that the portals for news are just not in these products that land on your doorstep, where the news is at least 8 to 12 hours old. That people want to know what's going on right now, and these other outlets are giving it to them the way they want it. You're seeing also some really nice developments. I think Block Club Chicago does a really nice job in here covering sort of local neighborhood style news. I mean, it's not really small news, but it's stuff that people want to read about, and they're doing a good aggressive job. And they seem to be doing pretty well with the subscriptions. I subscribe to them, and I think they get some charitable donations. But I think that the actual print newspaper is in trouble. And you may see – I keep predicting that ultimately you're going to see the newspapers in Chicago go to a reduced printing schedule, that the Saturday paper, the Monday paper, maybe the Tuesday paper just aren't making that much money. So you may see a Wednesday through Sunday publication without a Saturday paper, like a Wednesday, Thursday, Friday weekend thing. And that may be a way to save money and costs. And you may see smaller staffs. You may see that a newspaper will decide, well, we don't need our own movie critic, because you can get movie critics from the Associated Press, and we don't need our own national sports people. We don't need to send our reporters
But remember, that's what people used to subscribe for. They didn't want some generic syndicated something or other. They wanted local. They wanted Chicago's always been a town that liked its local people, whether that was on the radio, a local people, or, we didn't want to know what Rex Reed thought of the movies. We wanted to know what Roger Ebert thought and Gene Siskel thought.
Right, and I think the same is...
Why does nobody understand that that's what gets people to subscribe, those relationships?
Well, and I think another glaring omission, and this may sound a little self-serving, but I don't think it is, which is that both the Tribune and the Sun-Times have neglected the appeal of local newspaper columnists. There's really only one general interest newspaper columnist at the Tribune and Sun-Times right now, and that's our friend Neil Steinberg. Neil does a great job, but he doesn't... Nobody, all these other people are gone now. Mary Mitchell's gone. Mark Brown is gone from the Sun-Times. And from the Tribune, I'm gone. Mary Schmeek is gone. Cass is gone. Darlene Gladden is gone. That all these columnists left, and they didn't – the staff there isn't – the management there is not promoting and bringing forward these local voices. And I believe there's some really talented journalists in those newsrooms who could write columns if they were given the space and the time to develop. And people look for that. I would always look for columns when I was growing up. I would look for columns in the paper, and when as a reader I look for perspectives. I look for people who have an angle on stuff, and instead it's just a lot of news reporting, which is good. But I think a paper needs a personality. You need to have a reason why you're reading it there and not reading it like through the AP or just browsing online. You've got to have things that really appeal to readers. And I, for the life of me, don't understand why they don't devote some resources to creating some local columnists rather than the Tribune and sometimes to a degree will have these guest columnists. Willie Wilson writes a column for the Tribune every couple of weeks, and Paul Vallis writes every couple of weeks, and Dave Greising writes every couple of weeks. They've got a lot of people. Laura Washington, I think, writes every week. But these are stringers. They're paid a couple $100 a column. And they're not there every day or every other day the way good columnists are. And I think with local critics and local columnists is what makes a paper something that you really want to pick up. You want to say, remember the days. What is Royko going to say about this?
Exactly. I was just going to say, Ray and I went to see that one-man show of Mike Royko over at the Chopin Theater, and it really reminded me, because Royko wasn't simply a great observer of the local scene. He generally fought for the common man and the common good, and his writing was so good. I mean, this was a guy who could make you feel all the feels with his words. And I remember when I'm watching that, and I'm thinking, who's the Royko now?
Yeah, and I'm not. I think Royko was very talented, but I don't know that any columnist they could find could actually ever replicate that because of the importance of newspapers at the time, the circulation levels and everything. But the fact that they're not even trying to find anyone who could speak to people, and I think you need people. When I left, a lot of us, just a lot of old columnists. I'm not saying that old people can't say a lot of good things, but it's like me and Mary and Darlene and Steve and all these people and Cass. We were all like 60 plus. And I think if you want new readers, you've got to have someone who's speaking to that generation.
But does Alden want new readers, or are they happy that things are winding down?
Well, I'm sure they want readers. They want anyone who's going to pay them for access to their site or their paper. They want to make money. I don't think they're trying to kill the paper. I think they're going to hang with it as long as it's making them some money. And when it starts losing them some money, they'll either sell it or close it. But I don't think that'll happen soon. But they'll probably trim things even more substantially. And I think the Sun-Times is probably in as much or more trouble with the revenue that they're bringing in or not bringing in to run that place. So we have a situation here in the city where we need to bolster these things. That's why I tell people that, yeah, you can criticize the paper and you can complain about their editorials, but imagine the city without the Tribune and Sun-Times, and keeping an eye on City Hall and keeping an eye on Cook County and keeping an eye on the police department. I think that the newspapers form a real backbone for media, and it's not that expensive to subscribe digitally and support them. And I urge people to do that, even though I'm frustrated with them. Everybody's frustrated with them, but I think there are a lot of really talented journalists that are doing the best they can. And you see it in some of the reports. The Sun-Times did a great expose on Fritz Kage's failure to rein in the senior citizen discount on property taxes recently. A great investigative story. It's not a sexy story for TV, but it was really well done by the Sun-Times. And you need that. You need that kind of journalism. You need that kind of watchdog stuff in town. You're seeing a lot of working together, like with ProPublica Illinois is working together with some of these media outlets doing investigations, and because we really do need watchdogs. We need journalists.
We'll have organizations like the Better Government Association and Injustice Watch. Have they taken over that watchdog function that we used to count on the investigators at the local paper for?
They haven't taken it over, but they have supplemented it to the point where it is it remains vital. That we really needed them. If we were just relying on the newspapers, I think we would not have enough. But when you have these joint operations, I think we're seeing some really good work that's being done. But it's philanthropically funded, and a lot of fundraising and personal subscribers. It's not the heyday where the papers were basically minting money, because when they had all the classified ads they needed and all the movie ads that are now gone and all the things that used to support papers that don't anymore.
So I've been asking people this because I think that a lack of good information really played a role in this last election. Whether they are subscription or free, what would you recommend to our listeners? Maybe one or two news sources you use for national and international news that you think are very good and reliable, and a couple of local.
Well, I still think the New York Times is a great newspaper. And I know that a lot of people were complaining that they were both sides in the election.
Yes, that would be me. I was that person complaining.
I still think that by and large their coverage is really good. Washington Post, same. I read a lot of things. I read like New York Magazine, and I read Slate and Vox and places like that.
I thought Vox went bankrupt.
No, it's still around.
It's still around?
Vox, yeah. I mean, I like some of those. I like the New Republic. The Atlantic does a fabulous job, I think, covering national politics. Locally, I rely a lot on Rich Miller's blog, The Capitol Facts, for state news. And I think the Tribune and Sun-Times and Cranes do a good job still. And like I said, Block Club Chicago is one that I rely on. And those come to mind right now in terms of like what my reading pattern is. I tend to start my day looking through social media and finding like Channel 11 will often have good stories. Our friend Heather Sharon does some really nice work. It'll just pop up.
Really, you start with social media. I try to. I put social media last. First of all, I look at, mainstream media, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, the Trib, the Sun-Times. I get a ton of newsletters, just a ton of newsletters. And as at the very last, and frankly, I only go to social media because sometimes it's a good place to get pertinent sound clips that are about the right size for me to run on the radio, as opposed for me having to sometimes go to C-SPAN and listen to an entire 1-hour speech to come up with 3 or 4 sound clips. It's much more time efficient. But that's really, I don't go to social media for information much.
Oh, really? I go there because there are a number of sites that get linked to that I don't necessarily consult. Like if I were to speak, I've got to read the New York Times all the way through and the Tribune all the way through before I go to social media. Social media tends to hit the high points, and it also will hit things like just this afternoon when the Illinois Supreme Court overturned Jussie Smollett's conviction. I saw that first on Twitter. I still call it Twitter. And and I'm sure that it ultimately would show up in a news alert in my email, or even at the Tribune site. But I kind of like things pushed at me, and that's why I start the day looking at what's been going on overnight, who's pushing stuff out, what do they got here, and the news organizations are there. The Tribune is there, the Sun-Times is there, Cranes is there, Block Club is there. They're all, and I have a feed that is just all Chicago news sites like that. Politico sometimes will have stuff that I want to see, and so that's where I start.
So are you only on Twitter, or have you gone to another site as well?
No, I've joined Blue Sky like everybody else. I did that a couple of years, whenever it started, maybe a year ago.
I joined Blue Sky when it started, and I didn't feel that it was suitable for me for what I needed. But now that everybody is going to Blue Sky from Twitter, it is much more informative and much more useful to me than it ever was. I kept waiting for Threads, but as you know, Mark Zuckerberg made political content difficult to find. He wants Threads to be unicorns and rainbows and, hey, here's how to knit mittens or things like that. He doesn't really want it to be a political site, and there are obstacles for that. And also, people have told me on Threads there are certain words that will get you banned, and words that you would use in the course of talking about news and politics. So yeah, I'm at Blue Sky. That's my main site. I'm still on Threads, but I have completely deactivated my Zitter. That's what I call it, Zitter.
Yeah, I mean, I get that. It's just, and I'm waiting for that tipping point. I have about 20,000 followers on Twitter, which is not that really by most standards, but I only have about, I guess it's getting up to more like 700 now on Blue Sky because of all the people who've joined it recently. But it was like 200 a week ago.
Well, yeah. I don't. Everybody has complained about Blue Sky, that people who had 10,000 followers on Twitter go to Blue Sky, and now they're down to 500 followers. I had thousands of followers on Zitter, and I'm barely at the roughly the 100 mark on Blue Sky. So I don't know if it's just a question of time or what is going to be involved, but I just couldn't bear the thought of Elon Musk getting my support.
Content. You don't want to give him any content,
right?
I know that feeling. I've pretty much stopped posting on Twitter. I still read it, but I used to post more, and now I'm trying to post my thoughts elsewhere. And it's not a huge driver of traffic to the Picayune Sentinel. It's mostly just direct contact with people through email. It does drive some traffic, but not enough to make it worth selling my soul for. But I'm going to stay there until it turns into a complete Nazi husk, and then I'll move over totally to Blue Sky. But now I'm doing both, and that takes time. So I mean, the amount of time, I'm sure you spend a lot of time during your day, as I do, just absorbing news and reading.
Yeah. Well, I do that in part, not just necessarily because what I'm going to talk about, but when I take callers, people who call in will make reference to a lot of different things that are going on. And I don't like it when somebody wants to talk about something and I don't know what they're talking about. So I try to bone up on a little bit of everything that I think could possibly come up during the course of this show, so that when one of the callers says, hey, MSNBC might have new owners, and I know now that because I read this morning that Comcast is spinning off, is breaking up this whole Goliath that was MSNBC, CNBC, NBC, and they're splitting it up. But I was only able to have an intelligent discussion with Marty because I read something that I had no intention of mentioning on the show. So yeah, it's
Are all your listeners aghast that Joe and Mika met with President Trump?
Oddly enough, nobody has, aside from me, nobody has talked about it much. And I know we're out of time, but I thought I actually at the beginning of the show told the listeners your take on it, that, sort of a wait and see, maybe, talking to somebody who's in power. It can be certainly justified, and let's see if it changes who they are on the air. I shared that with them. I thought that was a very balanced take.
Yeah, if they start sucking up to Trump, I'm gone. But I haven't seen that yet, so we'll wait and see.
Eric Zorn, I could spend all day talking to Eric Zorn, but we have used up our allotted time. Thank you, Eric. Always a pleasure.
Thank you, Joan. It's always good to talk to you.
Say hello to my good friend John Williams. We're going to go to news. We're going to be back with more after this.
Hey, where's Hal Sparks? I'm not sure where he is now, but I know where you can find him Saturdays at 11. He'll be right here on WCPT 820 for the Hal Sparks radio program, Mega Worldwide. You're listening to WCPT 820 because facts matter.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive.
Take her away, Ian.
Yeah, take it away, Ernie. It's going to be a bumpy ride.
Joan Esposito.
Whoa, that's an explosive sentence.
On WCPT 820.
It's interesting that I was just talking with Picayune Sentinel columnist Eric Zorn and asking him what he read, what newsletters, what sources of information. I recently stumbled across a newsletter that I really liked, and that means I liked it enough to actually sign up to get it delivered into my email box. It's called The Handbasket, and it's written by Marissa Kabas, who joins us now. Marissa, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. So happy to be here.
Well, a couple of the things that you've written lately that I really want to talk about is on November 11th, you wrote, "It's time to lose our heads," which I frankly appreciated. And then on the 15th, you reflected something else that had been inside me, how Democrats are modeling acquiescence. You talked about it. You've got a picture there of that a moment when Joe and Jill Biden walked out after meeting with Donald Trump, and they all just have these big, cheery smiles like they are best friends, and they just had the best time ever. It was a photo that, frankly, a lot of my listeners, Marissa, said that they thought was really creepy and inappropriate. Because we know Donald Trump and that he's a very bad man. And it would be, it's one thing, you meet with him because you're supposed to meet with him. But do you have to come out and look like it's all puppy dogs and ice cream cones? Let's talk about how Democrats are modeling acquiescence.
Sure. Sure. So I think that there's a difference between being principled and having decorum, even though I don't necessarily think we necessarily need that at this moment either. But there's a difference between, the bare minimum and going above and beyond to make this new administration feel comfortable. And by inviting Donald Trump into the Oval Office, the office that he used to occupy, that he's going to occupy again, that he is so disrespected and denigrated over the years, it just doesn't make sense to me. I'm not really sure what the White House was thinking.
Yeah. And even if that's a tradition, and we all know Joe Biden is nothing if a guy who abides by tradition, and this is the way we've always done things, this is the way we're going to keep on doing things. But still, even if you're going to pose for a picture, there's a way of showing in a picture, yes, I'm here, this was the right thing to do, but it's not like, he and I are going to be planning a double date anytime soon. I guess that's what bothered a lot of my listeners, is that it would be one thing to come out from that meeting and, have a solemn photograph taken, but they kind of look giddy, and it kind of makes you wonder. It just kind of makes you wonder, because it would be one thing if a photograph like that, if it was a means to an end, if Joe Biden knew that by, really, buttering up Donald Trump, that somehow he could soften him or ameliorate the worst of his impulses. But we know that's not true. I know that's not true. I hope to God Joe Biden knows that's not true.
Yeah,
it seems like too much.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think it's really strange how he doesn't realize at this point that so much about politics is optics. And so if he's not aware that that photo is going to reflect poorly upon him and his party, and he's been doing this for so long, it's hard to understand what his point of view was when he's been doing this forever. And he knows that a picture is worth a million words at this point, especially when it spreads on social media within 0.5 seconds.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So as you see the waning days of the Biden administration, what do you see from either the Congress or the Senate? Anything you see that gives you hope? For instance, the fact that at least part of the pressure that got Matt Gaetz to step away was our very own congressman from Illinois, Sean Casten, saying that he was going to make the entire House vote on whether or not to release the report. And if the vote got defeated, he was going to bring it again, and he was going to bring it again, and he was going to bring it again, which at the very least would embarrass the heck out of them and certainly keep it in the public eye. Yay, Sean Casten. I'm a little concerned that I don't really feel like I've gotten that kind of fight out of the White House. What do you think? What do you see?
Yeah, absolutely. We need more fight like that. We need that spirit. I mean, listen, Democrats are down bad. The Republicans have control of both houses and the White House. We have few levers of power still at our disposal, but it doesn't mean that we don't have any. Right. And I think that we need to remember that and not just roll over and say, well, what's done is done. The voters have spoken. And so, I like I wrote and like you said, I've noticed that there are Democrats that just don't seem to have that fight in them. Like, for example, Leader Hakeem Jeffries has really disappointed me this week in this whole ridiculous faux controversy over the use of bathrooms at the Capitol for incoming Rep. Sarah McBride, who is trans. I was really hoping that he would come out swinging and say, you have all this power and this is what you're doing with it. We are going to protect our own no matter what. And he made, a kind of mild statement, but didn't do nearly enough to draw a line and say, you're not going to do this. Let's get to the real governing. So I can't say that I've seen a lot of great examples so far of people really taking the reins and using what little power that they have.
Mm-hmm. And what you just talked about, Hakeem Jeffries making a statement but not really maybe being particularly passionate about it or aggressive about it, that is something that I see over and over again with the Democrats. That's why, when I saw this thing about Sean Casten, I was like, whoa, because it stood out, because stuff like that doesn't come from the Democratic side very often, where we use the rules to bring a vote over and over again, if for nothing else than to make Republicans go on the record as saying, well, yeah, I'm not going to release that report, and something they have to defend for the rest of their careers. I agree with you. I agree with you that Hakeem Jeffries should have come out and said anything that was as passionate, half as passionate as Nancy Mace was when she was flailing her arms and shaking her head that she didn't want anybody that wasn't born a woman in her bathroom. Oh, my God, how could you make us do this? And when are we going to fight fire with fire, Marissa?
I know. I mean, we keep waiting for that, and Sean Casten is setting a really good example. Listen, it's only been 2 weeks since Election Day, even though it feels like it's been a million.
It has been 10 years. Don't you kid me. I have lived this. It is at least a decade.
I know. I believe you. Maybe there's been some sort of time warp. I'm not sure. But when you look at it, it hasn't been that long. So I think that Democrats are – I'm giving them the benefit of the doubt, which maybe I shouldn't be, but they're calibrating and trying to figure out how they're going to deal with a second Trump administration when it's something that they never expected that they would have to do again. And we thought surely after the insurrection, this would never be a problem again. Surely that he would be convicted of one of his many crimes. Surely we would have this nipped in the bud at some point in some court, and yet here we are again just 4 years later, and we're having to completely change our mindset. And so I'm just hoping that as things get real, as we get closer to the inauguration, or once we get to inauguration, that Dems will realize, it's time to kick into gear, and just because we're the minority doesn't mean that we're powerless.
Yes. Yes, indeed. I'm talking to Marissa Kabas, who writes something called The Handbasket. You really, really, really want to read this. You can get it on your browser. Go to thehandbasket.co, or you can just Google it. Just Google it, and you can sign up for her newsletters. We are going to take a break and talk about more of her writing right after this.
There's no excuse to miss Joan Esposito.
It's number one on my stereo.
Live, local, and progressive. You can listen to her daily at WCPT820.com on your computer or phone.
Alexa, play WCPT.
WCPT from TuneIn.
Now back to Joan Esposito. Live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
Marissa Kabas writes a newsletter called The Handbasket, and one of her recent articles was, "It's time to lose our heads. Giving up isn't an option, but playing by the same old rules isn't one either." Kind of a continuation of the discussion, Marissa, we were having right before the break. What are the new rules you think we should be playing by?
Well, I certainly think that it's time for new voices to take control of the Democratic Party. I think for the last few cycles, the same old people, the folks who ran the first and second Obama campaign, and people who came up, when digital campaigning first became a thing, they have been in charge for quite some time now. And I think there's just a lot of antiness and impatience with the way that they handle things. And it's just frankly not working. I mean, even though we've won most of the popular votes, we have not won all the electoral college votes, and so we need to try something different. And so I think that could mean putting younger people in charge, but not necessarily even. I mean, I think of people like Barbara Lee, who is so clear-headed and so moral and really understands what needs to be done in a slightly more maybe progressive, radical context than some other Democratic leaders. But I think overall what we need to do is not keep tacking to the center. I don't think that's getting us anywhere, and I don't think that's winning the respect of Republicans, because the Republican Party has become completely radicalized. And so there's people who still talk about sensible Republicans, and I don't really think those people exist anymore. I think that there are true believer Republicans. I think there are people who are kind of confused, somewhere in the middle, not really sure. And then there are Democrats and progressives. And so what we need to do is get our own people to turn out and not try to pick off people from the other side. And I think we also need to rethink the concept of reaching across the aisle. People say that a lot, and it's considered a political virtue to reach across the aisle and try to work in a bipartisan way. I think when I think of reaching across the aisle, we need to grab people and not meet them on the other side. Bring them over. Show them why it's actually good over here, why we're going to be giving them the things that they need, and not, to use the word again, acquiesce to the things that we assume they might want. I think a lot about how Kamala talked a lot about on the campaign trail about owning a gun. And I just thought that was crazy because Democrats are supposed to be the anti-gun party. So I'm like, why are we throwing them this bone? What is this going to get us? And ultimately,
so you think that the Democratic Party needs to be what? More progressive, more openly embracing of progressive platforms and ideas to be successful? Because there's a lot of people arguing that that's exactly the problem. Tom Nichols wrote recently in The Atlantic that, the Democratic Party should worry less about stands on particular issues and more on what it takes to win, be a more pragmatic party. Not that the different stands have to be repudiated, but maybe they don't have to be the central platforms of the party, that we've got to form a broad base if we want to win, and that means maybe not always acquiescing to the different pressure groups. He pointed out, the way he tells it, the Trump campaign used that soundbite from Kamala about, transgender people in prisons should have access to medical care. And his argument is that she was pressured into making a public statement about that because the ACLU was fighting some sort of case and they wanted her to make a public statement, but that maybe in the context of a bigger picture and a bigger country and a bigger election, maybe that should have been an issue that she didn't want to address publicly. And that maybe that would have, it's those polarizing stands that he was arguing make it difficult to win the general elections. You seem to be saying the exact opposite of that, or I'm confused. So straighten me out here, Marissa.
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, Tom is coming from a Republican point of view, and I'm coming from a progressive point of view. I know that he's changed his views somewhat, moderated them over the years, but, I don't think that the Democratic Party should be taking cues from Republicans. I couldn't disagree more that we should step away from the most marginalized and the most endangered people in our society in order to win, because in that way we're sacrificing our values. I think that the best thing we can do, and what I was alluding to before, is that Democrats are the party against guns. We're against demonizing immigrants. We're against violating human rights. So just stand firm in those. Things like that soundbite that you referred to, that's a specific thing that's going to get played over and over again. If I'm not mistaken, that was from 2019, so it wasn't even something that recently happened.
No, it was an oldie.
Yeah. And so, if they're going to use a clip from 4 years ago and blast it out everywhere, they're going to do that. But that doesn't mean that it's representative of the party as a whole and that we're focusing too much on these so-called fringe issues. I mean, look at the DNC. I watched every night of the DNC. Trans people were not mentioned once. Not a single time. There, not even just not a trans speaker. Not any of the other speakers mentioned the attacks on trans people. And now look where we are. The very first thing that's happening in this Congress. So it's kind of like letting them write the playbook. They're saying we're so obsessed with these issues, and meanwhile they're the ones who are obsessed with it. And so I think we need to make it clear that they're obsessed with kind of things that are weird, as Tim Walz put it, and we're obsessed with protecting people, and that's not weird.
I realize that misogyny and racism played an outside role, and there's also a worldwide trend that the data scientists are identifying about incumbents being thrown out in lots of elections. But when you look at this last election, how do you think people justified voting for such an incredibly reprehensible human being?
That's the thing that's been hardest for me these last couple of weeks. And I'm honestly still trying to figure it out, just like the rest of the country. I think maybe it was a reminder that the misogyny and the racism are even more baked into this country's fabric than we had thought. You know, people have talked about we're in a post-racial society, and it's been all these years since the civil rights movement, and like why is everything about race? But when you look at it, how could this election not at least been in part about race? Ever since Barack Obama was elected president, Republicans have been on a tear trying to frighten white people and make them feel like their status in this society is under siege. And they've been successful at it. And I think that just shows, the results of this election showed that their project of making white grievance the national pastime has been pretty successful.
Yeah. I think that the election of Barack Obama scared a lot of people deeply. And, you know, I know it's going to be difficult to quantify, even though the data researchers have told me that they have special trick questions that they can ask people to figure out whether or not they were actually motivated by racism. But I remember right before the election, my partner was talking to our next door neighbor, who's just the sweetest, most loving human being. And he said he was really worried about this election. And, you know, of course, we were like, oh, you know, it's going to be great. And we're knocking on doors and there's all this money and all this groundswell. And when it turned out he was right, we said, you know, what gave you that impression? And he said, I thought that there were going to be a lot of people who, when they got in the privacy of a voting booth, simply couldn't bring themselves to vote for a black woman. And I think there was a lot of that.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And I think there was this idea that this particular black woman, Kamala Harris, is not going to fight for me, a white man or a white woman, that she is looking out for minorities more than me. And it's a narrative. It's a narrative that's been created. And I think that the idea that, you know, a rising tide lifts all ships is not the American way. I just need to lift my own ship. And so that's what Donald Trump is selling. He's saying, if you are savvy and cunning and don't care about playing by the rules, you too can become president of the United States twice. And so it's just sending all the wrong messages, but unfortunately people have fully absorbed them, and I think that makes them feel okay about voting for him.
Ugh. Marissa, our time has come to an end. Thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, absolutely. It was wonderful.
And again, the newsletter is called, it's easy to remember, it's called The Handbasket. And you can find it online at thehandbasket.co. We are going to take a break. We're going to be back with more after this.
Get social with WCPT 820 and follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at WCPT 820.
This is Chicago's Progressive Talk, 820 AM, WCPT Willow Springs, and online at WCPT820.com, where facts matter.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
Many of us are familiar with the name Emmett Till. Emmett Till was a 14-year-old black boy who in 1955 was kidnapped, tortured, killed, and dumped in the Tallahatchie River in Mississippi. His murder and the trial that followed were a big part of the civil rights movement. In a couple of days, on November 23rd, the Chicago History Museum is going to open a new exhibit. It is titled Injustice, The Trial for the Murder of Emmett Till. Exhibition curator from the Chicago History Museum, Charles Bethea, joins us now to talk about this new exhibition. Charles, thank you for being here.
Oh, hi. How are you doing? Thank you for having me.
Why did the History Museum decide to do this? Did you originate this, or is this a traveling exhibit?
No, it is an original exhibition that we created here at the Chicago History Museum, and it was something that I had been discussing and thinking about for quite some time. So understanding the story around Emmett Till, there's no one great time to tell it, but we definitely need to keep it in the mindset of Americans, particularly Chicagoans, since it is a uniquely Chicago story.
He grew up when he was, well, he was young when he died, but when he was younger, he lived in Chicago. Talk about that, if you would.
Certainly. One of the aspects of this particular exhibition, it does shed light on this fully realized human being, this young child, because when we often think of Emmett Till, we think about the tragedy that led to his death. However, this exhibition does also paint the light of this young black child growing up in the late 1940s, 1950s in Chicago, and playing, doing all the things that kids love to do, to play, eat ice cream, hang out with his friends, climb trees, and do all the sorts of things that most kids have an opportunity to do. So it gets for us to allow audiences to see Emmett Till as this fully realized human being.
When did Emmett Till, did he move to see relatives in Mississippi? Did his family pick up and move to Mississippi? Tell me how that happened.
Oh, certainly. Actually, that time frame, as a lot of African Americans were a part of the Great Migration moving from the South to the North, Emmett Till's family was no different. They moved from Mississippi to establish a place in Chicago, and there were other family members that were still in Mississippi at the time. And it wasn't unheard of for a lot of African-American families for summer vacation and the like to go back home, if you will, to the South, and in this instance for the Tills, back to Mississippi to visit. Well, when Emmett learned that his best friend and his cousin, Wheeler Parker Jr., was going away for the summer back home to visit family and relatives in Mississippi, he begged his mother that could he go, and she reluctantly said yes.
So he was with his friend's family?
He was with his cousins, which was his best friend, yes.
Talk about now, walk us through for those people who have only a very passing familiarity with the case. What happened in Mississippi? What led up to this horrific killing?
Well, what we know is that after a day of doing some chores and playing around, Emmett, along with Wheeler and two other of his cousins, decided to drive 3 miles away from where they were to visit a grocery store. And it happened to be one of the only grocery stores in the area, which was Bryant's Meat Market and Grocery. So they went there. When they arrived, each of them went into the store that had, a few dollars to spend or a few coins to spend and purchased some things like candy and what have you. Well, Emmett was the last one of the group to go into the store, and he went in, he purchased his candy, and he left the store. After he left, shortly thereafter, the proprietor's wife, Carolyn Bryant, came out of the store. And when she did that, it is said that Emmett did a wolf whistle towards her. And that shocked everyone around him. All of the younger kids that were there out on the porch of the store, some of the older black folks that were there that witnessed it, and it scared everyone. So Emmett and his cousins, they grabbed him, they pulled him, they jumped in their car, and they sped off. Now, 3 days later, when they were asleep, because Emmett had begged, realizing that what he had done was bad at this point, in this juncture, he had begged his cousins not to tell his great uncle who the house that's where they're staying, and they didn't. So late one night, 3 days later after this event, at least we know of 2 men came to the house where Emmett was staying, in Moses Wright's house, and physically took Emmett from the premises and drove off. And they took him to a different area, not too far away, and tortured him to the point where they ended up killing him. Now, part of this torture, as horrific as it was, and most people don't really realize, they fractured his skull. They were pistol whipping him. They gouged out one of his eyes, separated an ear, severed an ear, knocked out all of but 2 teeth, and finally killed him with a single gunshot to the head. Afterwards, they took his body, grabbed barbed wire, wrapped it around his neck, tied the other end to an 80-pound cotton gin fan, a cotton impeller, and discarded his body into the Tallahatchie River. And there, it wasn't until 3 days after he was deposited in that river where his remains discovered.
Oh, what a horrific, horrific occurrence. When he was removed from the house, you said it was at night. Were the other family members awake? Was anybody aware of what was happening? I mean, not that they could call the police.
They were aware. I know at least one of his cousins that was in the room with him was told to also get up, but he wanted to lay down and hide. Other 2 cousins were told to stay in their room and get back. Now, this was all in the middle of the night in darkness. And so as the account occurred, all he saw were, shadows of these 2 men holding a flashlight, one with a flashlight, another with a pistol, and demanding that he get up, get dressed. All the while, his aunt and his uncle were pleading with him, saying, no, please allow us to discipline him. We will send him back to Chicago, the whole 9 yards, but to no avail. And when they drove off, that was the last time any of them would see Emmett alive.
What happened after Emmett's body was found?
After his body was pulled from the river, his very, badly decomposing at this time, bloated from water, and the trauma, the physical trauma that his head, neck, and face area had received, he was barely recognizable as a human being. A young boy who was fishing found his body, called the police, and when they exhumed his body from the river, the only way they could identify Emmett was by a signet ring that he had on his finger that used to belong to his father. And so his great uncle, Moses Wright, recognized that ring because he wore it the entire time he was visiting the family in Mississippi, and that's how they identified the body. Now, as far as what happened next, because of the brutality that occurred with Emmett, the Mississippi Coroner's Office quickly absconded his body and wanted to bury him in Mississippi without any objections or questioning or what have you. When Mamie learned that the body was recovered, she demanded that it be sent back to Chicago, which it was. But they told her, under fear of reprisal of the law, do not open the box, if you will, that his remains were shipped at. But she did when we got to the coroner, and that's when she really discovered the impact of the torture that had taken place with her son. So when later on, when Emmett was being funeral services, which were 4 days of a wake and a day-long funeral service that spanned that week, over 100,000 Chicagoans came out to pay respects to Emmett. And his mother, Mamie Till, with her, courageous in her actions here, decided to have an open glass casket for all the world to see what hate had done to her son. All the while, she also had the photographs that were taken the day she was reunited with her son at the coroner's office here in Chicago. Photographs were taken of the evidence of that brutality, and she allowed those images to be published in Jet magazine. So that's how the majority of the world was first introduced in the September 15th, 1955 pages of Jet magazine, where people saw this horrific experience that befell this young man.
Wow. And what followed after that? Because I know this whole incident was a big part of the civil rights movement, but tell us what happened after that.
Well, it was. Since the world saw what happened to Emmett Till in the pages of Jet magazine, it's really the impetus to really spark the burgeoning civil rights movement that was getting off the ground at the time. And maybe people don't realize that even Rosa Parks, who we attribute her bravery for refusing to give up her seat on that Montgomery bus, later on when she was interviewed, she said what gave her additional courage was thinking about Emmett Till and the images that she saw in Jet magazine. So a lot of historians and scholars do attribute the motivation, if you will, and the encouragement of others based on sparking the civil rights movement to give it to the fever pitch that it did in the 1955-1960 time frame. So with that, one of the things is Mamie Till, who was very close to her son, her only son, that she had lost. The only way for her to get through this, as she would say later on, was to talk about the atrocity and talk about the injustice that had often happened with African Americans in the country, particularly dealing with her son. And she went on the speaking tours and informing as many people and raising awareness as she could as to the atrocity that occurred with him specifically and others till this day, that she wanted to raise awareness for people to understand some of the brutality, be it police brutality or some of the injustice or systemic aspects of racism within court systems with a lot of minorities. And she advocated and was an activist for that till she passed away.
Did she? You say she spoke. She spoke at churches. Was she invited to speak before, I don't know, other groups? Who did she speak to?
She was invited to speak at church groups and at assemblies and other activist organizations, particularly in New York, areas of Chicago, up and down the Eastern Seaboard, out in California as well. And she did get invitations to speak overseas. I don't think that she had, but she did go on this tour, particularly working with at the invitation, a lot of NAACP organizations that hosted her in different areas around the country. So she herself became a household name dealing with this ordeal and this travesty of injustice that happened to her own son. Now, the interesting thing with this is that she did serve as a witness during the trial, or the murder trial, and she herself also knew that the likelihood of that time in 1955, two white felons being convicted of murdering a black person, let alone a young black person, a child, who, again, he was 14, the probability of a guilty verdict was, slim and none. And it wasn't a guilty verdict. They were acquitted. And afterwards, both felons stated in another magazine that, yes, they admitted to killing him for these reasons. Jury members also came out and said that we knew they were guilty, but there was no way that we would, accuse other white men of killing a black person.
So the jury members were also, at least some of them, were convinced of the men's guilt, but were because of they didn't want to condemn a white person of killing a black person. Were they personally afraid? I'm a little puzzled that a jury member would come out and say, yeah, we thought they were guilty, but man, we weren't going to go there. Why?
Well, there's a lot of reasons for it. Upholding aspects of white supremacy or racism within the South, the systems that were in the South at the time, and actually throughout the country in various areas. But definitely in parts of Mississippi, that was a way of life. And it was not going to be, Emmett Till's case was not going to be a turning point. Even though there are accounts of people who were affiliated with the jury and family members of the 12 white men that served on the jury that were appalled of the brutality that happened to a child, but not to the point to want to change the narrative of how, quote, unquote, things were in the South.
My God. This sounds like a difficult exhibit to put together. When we come to the History Museum, what kinds of documents or other exhibits do you have?
The things that we will see specifically with this exhibition, with the injustice, the trial for the murder of Emmett Till, the majority of the exhibition is made up of photographs that are part of the museum's collection that were taken around the time of his funeral and burial, as well as early photographs of Emmett Till, some rarely seen. Again, that places him in the mindset of being this young kid, like other kids enjoying life. But the mainstay of the exhibition are the original hand-drawn drawings, courtroom drawings that were created by Franklin McMahon, who was there serving as a court artist on assignment from a magazine to document the trial itself. So since the Chicago History Museum owns those images, this was an opportunity. There's 46 or so in total, and this is the first time that we've exhibited the majority of them. I think actually 43 of the 46. So people will have a good understanding of how 5 days of the trial unfolded based on these court drawings.
Unbelievable. And, it would be so great, Charles, if you and I were talking about this as something that happened long ago, and man, isn't it great that all that kind of racism is in the rearview mirror. But whether you meant this to be or not, this exhibit seems more timely than anyone could have guessed.
Oh, absolutely. Again, Emmett's cousin and best friend, Reverend Willa Parker, Jr., who's still with us to this day, cites that he refers to Emmett as one of the first Black Lives Matter posted individuals. Because when you start to think about what happened to him, being accused of disrespect, if you will, is something as trivial as a whistle, to lose his life over as a prank, to where we are in present day when particularly, minorities, particularly African-American men and women, for that matter, are often accused of very trivial things and end up losing their lives based on aspects of police brutality or losing their freedom based on very limited information within the court systems that there could be other evidence that would prove contradictory, but still fall victim to some aspects of racism. So, yes, unfortunately, this is not an event that was just isolated to 1955 Mississippi. Unfortunately, some of these same atrocities that unfold in different ways are occurring today.
Yeah. And aside from the overt violence, there's the insidious sort of racism. I was just listening to Jasmine Crockett, the congresswoman from Texas, speak this morning, and she was talking about how, Kamala Harris and Ketanji Brown, how, it was like they're held to such a high standard, and are they good enough, and are they DEI? They may be Harvard educated, they may have years of experience, they may be more experienced than anybody else in their field, but was it really just DEI? Are they where they are now just because of the color of their skin? And God only knows how long that's going to be a part of it. Because it isn't just, I grew up in the era of, a woman's got to be twice as good and twice as dedicated, to get ahead, to get a job. And I remember remembering somebody saying, well, we'll know we have equality when a mediocre woman can get a good job that a mediocre man can get right now. But it just seems like I've heard people argue recently that this is just so much of who we are as a nation that maybe we'll never get rid of it. Maybe that's too pessimistic, Charles. What do you think?
I would love to be optimistic here. I mean, that's the only way that keeps me going. But as a historian, I can tell you that there's a cyclical theory of history, especially as it deals with racism in America, and the evidence of some of the highest resistance towards freedom and equality as related to American racism towards black people has this cyclical ebb and flow. Because if you think about it, over the past 200 years, history would demonstrate that America has witnessed approximately around 40 years of oppression and state-sanctioned violence, often followed by roughly 30 years of a progressive era. And just to put that into, a timeline, if you think about the 1820s to roughly the 1860s, even that being the height of parts of slavery, that was still some of the worst times for Africans and African Americans and enslaved people. If you think about the 1820s, you had the Black Codes. That time period, you have this uptick where between the Black Codes and increased slave patrols to an abolitionist movement and resistance that led to a civil war. And then you have a period after that, you have Reconstruction. This is your 30-year high. Between 1870s and 1900s, you have Reconstruction. You have the Freedoms Bureau coming out. You have these first waves of mass migration moving. And then that brings you to the 1920s. So 1920s to 1960s, again, some of the most horrific time periods where you have the rise of Jim Crow and race riots and lynchings and, for example, Tulsa, Oklahoma and other places, that gives way to organized community resistance, to the civil rights movement, to voting rights. And then you have that progressive era that goes from the 70s to the 2000s, the nation seeing the first black president, more rights and laws coming into play that cater to minorities. So that brings us back to 2020. So potentially with this 2020 to 2060, what would that reveal for American history?
Can we move that timeline up? I'm not sure I'm going to make it to 2060, and I'd sure like to see things turn around a little bit, Charles. And please work on that to do what you can to speed things along.
I definitely will.
Thank you.
I definitely will. And as long as we can continue to do the type of exhibitions at the Chicago History Museum that allow people to get a better understanding of history, and not necessarily to change their minds, but at least looking at history to figure out who they are.
And this exhibition opens Saturday, is that correct?
It does open Saturday, and there's something timely about that. That is would have been maybe till Mowgli's birthday. Oh. So we wanted to open it up on her birthday.
Charles Bethea is the exhibition curator at the Chicago History Museum. Over the holidays, this is one of the museums you definitely want to hit. This is an exhibit that you need to see. Charles, thank you so much for being here and telling us all about it.
No, again, thank you so much for having me.
Take care. That is it for me. Driving It Home with Patty Vasquez is up next. She's got a co-host today, Elizabeth Laidlaw. And tomorrow, Richard Chu is going to be talking to Karen Byrne of the True Blue podcast and, of course, taking your calls like I will be doing for the first half of the show tomorrow. So stay safe, my friends. Have a great evening. Plan to visit the Chicago History Museum and see the Emmett Till exhibit over the holidays. We got to do the important stuff in addition to the fun stuff, okay? Have a great evening. Good night.